Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another news video here to discuss. We're going to start today's video off by discussing a couple of standings updates. Then we're going to go over to some signings, waiver updates, injury updates, and some trade rumors involving Nashville, St. Louis, Ottawa, Florida, Arizona, and Pittsburgh. And we'll go to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the NT Talk channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to without you guys. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all those discussed in today's video. Now, as we talked about on Tuesday, I'm going to not do any more game review videos for the next little while. I'm going to focus on dedicate all my time to doing the trade rumor stuff. So with that in mind, at the beginning of every video that I do, I'm going to do a standings update, showing you what the standings look like as of the most recent games. So here's just look at the standings as of right now. If you look at the Pacific Division, the Vancouver Canucks lead with 80 points. They're followed by 70-point Vegas, 68-point Edmonton, 66-point LA, 57-point Seattle, 57-point Calgary, 42-point Anaheim, and 35-point San Jose. In the Central Division, you have 76-point Dallas leading the Central, followed by 74-point Colorado, 73-point Winnipeg, 60-point St. Louis, 60-point Nashville, 58-point Minnesota, 50-point Arizona, and 33-point Chicago. In the Metro Division, you have 77-point Rangers leading the division, followed by 71-point Carolina, 67-point Philly, 60-point New Jersey, 60-point NYR, 58-point Washington, 56-point Pittsburgh, and 46-point Columbus. Those are teams that I was looking at right now in the East on the Metro side. And on the Atlantic Division side, you have 79-point Boston currently leading the Atlantic Division, followed by 78-point Florida, 70-point Toronto, 65-point Tampa, 64-point Detroit, 54-point Buffalo, 52-point Montreal, and 49-point Ottawa. And those are teams on the outside looking in right now in the Eastern Conference. So interesting stuff there. Lots of interesting updates here standings-wise after the past few days of game action. Next, we're going over to a couple of signings that happened over the past couple of days. There have been a few signings that happened over the past few days, including one in New York. The New York Rangers just have Johnny Brodzinski up right now as their third line center. Has actually been doing really well as a call-up option as their third line center with Filipino out. Has earned himself, after having a solid season so far, a 2-year contract extension. Brodzinski signs a 2-year contract extension with New York Rangers with an AV of $788,000, and a deal will begin at the start of next year. So this is a very good sign there for the Rangers and Brodzinski. Brodzinski has been mostly an AHL player over the past few years. He spent the last 4 seasons with the New York Rangers in either AHL or NHL affiliates. 3 years ago, he got 1 goal in 5 games of NHL action after having 17 and 14 AHL games. 2 years ago, he had 39 points in 36 AHL games, but had a goal and assist in 22 NHL games. Last year, also had a goal and assist in 17 NHL games after having over a point per game again in the AHL. So far this year, he was over a point per game in the NHL by a lot, having 11 goals and 25 points in 15 games. Was called up, and so far he's having himself a career season, putting up 4 goals and 15 points in 37 games. He's already doubled his career total in points in a mere 37 games after only having 17 points in 101 games going into this year. So very good stuff there for Brodzinski. He's actually worked out quite well. He's playing really well with youngsters Cooley and Kako on the third line. A lot of people do think with Brodzinski's emergence as a solid third line center for the Rangers, it may sort of tone down the need for the Rangers to go after a top-end center and give up huge assets to do so. So it does seem like this is a really good player for the New York Rangers. Even if he's not a long-term fit on the bottom 6, he's easily still a really good call-up option for the New York Rangers. So a really good sign there. It's under $800,000. So if he doesn't work out over the next couple of years, they can bury him in the minors. It's not that big of a deal. And I think this is a very fantastic sign for Brodzinski. It's very low risk, but it's extremely high reward if Brodzinski can continue to produce the way he has been this past year. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how it goes, but Rangers signed Brodzinski to a 2-year $788,000 extension, and I think this is going to be a fantastic deal for New York Rangers given how well Brodzinski has played this year as their third line center. So interesting signing there for the New York Rangers. And then we saw another signing earlier in the day yesterday, and that was for one of the Red Wings youngsters. That's NYR and Rasmussen, who was in the final year of a 3-year $1.46 AAV deal, signed a 4-year contract extension with the Detroit Red Wings with an AAV of $3.2 million, and the deal will begin at the start of next year. Now for the Red Wings, this is a fantastic signing. Rasmussen has been a really good player ever since they took him top 10 in the 2017 draft. He started off really slowly, but so far this past couple of years he's been really good. 2 years ago had 27 points in 80 games, including a career high 15 goals. Last year put up a career high 29 points in 56 games, and so far this year already has 23 points in 55 games. So he's on pace to probably hit right around 30, 35 points. He's not a big name, but he can put up consistently. I think he still has a little bit of room to grow, so I could see him put like 30 to 40 points on consistently. So I think a $3.2 million deal is pretty good. This takes him, I think, to UFA status, so interesting stuff there for the Wings. But I think this is a really good signing. Rasmussen's been a really good player over the past couple of years. He's been a really good physical, point-producing middle six forward, and I think with his size and stuff like that, he's been a really good piece there for the Detroit Red Wings. And he's been a really good piece for them ever since they took him top 10. So this is a really good signing, in my opinion. I think this is going to be a fantastic fit for the next couple of years for the Detroit Red Wings. I think Rasmussen works really well with them on like a third line role, and I think at $3.2 million for the next 4 years, that's a pretty good deal for the Detroit Red Wings. And if he can continue to grow, like he's probably going to be on pace to hit 30, 35 points this year, if he can continue to grow and eventually be like a 40, 50 point player, I think that might be a steal of a deal getting him for 4 years at $3.2 million. So it'll be interesting to see there, but some interesting signings over the past couple of days. First, Rasmussen signs a 4-year deal with the Detroit Red Wings with an AAV of $3.2 million. He's going to remain in Detroit. And then Brodzinski signs a 2-year deal, $788,000 AAV deal with the Rangers, and he's going to remain in New York. So interesting stuff there. Going over to a couple of waiver updates in the past few days. On Tuesday, we had a couple of waiver updates as Jacob MacDonald in San Jose, as well as Zach Sanford in Chicago, were placed on waivers. Now, Sanford was claimed off of waivers earlier in the year by the Blackhawks after they got a couple of injuries to guys like Bedard, Foligno, things like that from Arizona. He's been doing all right as like a bomb 6'4", but he's not a long-term fit, and he wasn't really a huge piece of that team, so I wasn't expecting him to get claimed. Jacob MacDonald's been a decent player, has been playing really consistent either forward or defensive minutes there for the San Jose Sharks, but with the Sharks getting a little bit healthier, guys like Smith and Thrun getting back into game action, they don't really need MacDonald. They already have a lot of the defensemen on the roster, so they wound up waiving him. I thought he might have been claimed given the fact of how well he's done this year, how versatile he's been so far this year, but both guys wound up clearing. Not too surprised on Sanford. I wasn't expecting Sanford to be claimed in the first place when he was placed on waivers by Arizona a couple of months ago, and he did get claimed by the Hawks. That was just given the fact that they had a lot of injuries to their forward group, so I'm not really surprised that Sanford cleared at this point in time. He's a decent player. He's more of a spare forward / AHL forward at this point in time. I don't think he was much of an upgrade on much teams' forward group, so I'm not really surprised he clears. MacDonald, he's a decent 6'7" defenseman. I could have saw a couple of teams claim him, especially ones that have some injuries right now. He's a cheap option. He's not overly expensive. I think he's also in the final year of his deal, but he does wind up clearing. So I'm not overly surprised by that, but I did think there might have been a little bit more interest in MacDonald than there was in Sanford, but both do wind up clearing. So the Sharks get a little bit more of a roster flexibility and are able to send him to the minors. Hawks are able to send Sanford to the minors. So interesting stuff there. And then we saw yesterday Colin White be placed on waivers by Pittsburgh Penguins. Now I'm not exactly sure what the outcome is at this point in time, just given the fact that we don't have the waiver updates as of right now, but Colin White was signed very late into the season. I think he was on a PTO for some time with the Pittsburgh Penguins too, so I would expect he probably clears. He's a decent fourth line forward, spare forward, AHL forward at this point in time, but I'm not exactly sure if he's a real upgrade on a ton of teams' forward group. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but I'll expect White to probably clear. There was a lot of chance for a lot of teams to sign him, and the Penguins did wind up signing him as a depth option, but with them getting a little bit healthier now, I don't think they really need White at the NHL level, and they're placing him on waivers to place him back into the minors. So interesting stuff there on the waiver update part of the video. So Sanford was placed on waivers by the Blackhawks, MacDonald by the Sharks, both cleared. Not overly surprised by either of those. Sanford's more of an AHL forward at this point in time. Not overly surprised he cleared. MacDonald's a good 6'7" defenseman. I thought maybe a team or two had to have some interest, but he also winds up clearing, so some interesting stuff there. And then Colin White's on waivers right now. I'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with him and if he gets claimed or not, but my gut instinct's telling me that he does probably wind up clearing. So I'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but White's on waivers for the Penguins, while Sanford and MacDonald have cleared waivers for the Sharks and the Blackhawks. I'm going over to a couple of injury updates here from the past few days. So from the past couple of days, we have had a couple of injuries. First, Nick Dowd has an upper body injury and is out day to day for the Capitals, but we also saw Ryan Lindgren be cleared to play for the Rangers, Matt Duchene for the Stars, Chinnikov for the Jackets, Siegenthaler for the Devils, and Ekblad for the Panthers, and they've already gone back into game action or should in not just the future. Meanwhile, we got a couple of other injury updates yesterday, including Mark Stone has an upper body injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. I have seen some people say Stone could be out a little while now, so a lot of people would probably say cap circumvention again for the Vegas Golden Knights if Stone's out for the entirety of the rest of the regular season. I'm not exactly sure what's happening with Stone. He might be back in the next couple of weeks. He might be back in a month or two. He might be back around the deadline. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen there, but it does seem like Stone is injured, so that's a big blow for Vegas. For the LA Kings, the Victor Arvidsson's a lower body injury. He's out for a week-to-week period of time, and some people do think it could be a little bit longer week-to-week, so it'll be interesting to see what the Kings do, but I do think he'll probably go on long-term injury reserve. Casey Zizekas has a hand injury, out for an unknown period of time for the Islanders. Zach Bogosian has a upper body injury, out for an unknown period of time for the Minnesota Wild. Louis Crevier has a face injury, out for a day-to-day period of time for the Hawks. Panarin and VC both have lower body injuries for the Rangers, out for a day-to-day period of time. Scott Perunovich has a lower body injury and is a game-time decision for tonight's game for the St. Louis Blues. Noel Acciari's concussion has been updated to day-to-day, so it's really good to see him probably getting healthier from this concussion injury. Hampus Lindholm has an undisclosed injury and is out for a week-to-week period of time, so a horrible injury blow there for the Boston Bruins. Matt Grzelcyk also has a lower body injury and is out for a day-to-day period of time, so a horrible blow there for the Bruins as well. But we saw Jordan Harris in Montreal, Joseph Woll in Toronto, and Giovanni Smith in San Jose all be cleared to play and should be able to get back into game action in the not-too-distant future. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but lots of injury updates over the past couple of days. Good to see guys like Woll be cleared to play, Harris be cleared to play, Duchesne be cleared to play, Lindgren in New York be cleared to play, so really good stuff there. But still, awful news to see guys like Hampus Lindholm go down for a week-to-week period of time, Vic Arvidsson go down for a week-to-week period of time, Artemi Panarin be out for a day-to-day period of time in Vegas. Losing Mark Stone is going to be an awful blow to that team. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but hopefully those guys who are out for an overly next period of time are not going to be out for an overly long period of time. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors in the past couple of days. Now I'm going to start with the Ottawa Senators. There's been a couple of reports I've seen over the past little while that we know that the Senators are going to be sellers. It's not too much of a surprise that that's probably going to be the case for the Ottawa Senators. They're really low in the standings. I think they're currently something like 15 points out of the playoff spot. They had a really good stretch over there for a past little while, but then they've lost 3 or 4. They're probably going to wind up selling off some pieces. We know Tarasenko's a very likely trade candidate, given the fact he's a UFA. Same thing with Kubalik. We know they're going to try and move some of their pending UFAs before a deadline, but a couple of non-pending UFAs, some actually younger players who a lot of people have been rumored that they could actually wind up trading, is young defenseman Erik Brannstrom and fourth-line center Mark Kastelic. Now, Mark Kastelic has not had the best of seasons this year with Ottawa. He's been a decent player, but he's not been to the level that they were hoping for him to be, and definitely not to the level of play that he's played over last year, so they're not really overly fond with how he's played so far this year. I think they could definitely look to try and move him. Not exactly sure what sort of a return they could get. Kastelic is, like I said, a fourth-line center, so I don't think they'll be able to get like first-round or second-round picks for him, but I could see him get like a third-round pick and a decent prospect maybe for a guy like Mark Kastelic who could go to another team and be a solid fourth-line center, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but it does sound like Kastelic's name is out there for the Senators, and after not overly good season this year, following a really good season last year, it does sound like Ottawa may be a little bit open to moving him. Erik Brannstrom's another guy who's been mentioned in trade rumors a lot over the past year. There was a lot of talk that when they were needing some cap space, when their long-term injuries were coming to an end, that Brannstrom could be a guy to wind up being moved. They have a really good decor. They have Chychrun, they have Shabbat, they have Zub, they have Sanderson. Jacob Bernard-Dockner's not done overly badly this year. They have Cleven in the minors, they have Thompson in the minors, they have Hamara, who's not too long away from being an NHL. They have a really good blue line. They have really good blue line prospects, and it sounds like Brannstrom's sort of falling out of favor in Ottawa. Now, he's a former first-round pick, was taken, I think, top 15 by the Vegas Golden Knights in 2017. He hasn't really amounted to what the Senators really wanted when they traded for him in the Mark Stone deal, so he could definitely use a fresh start. I think he's a really good third pair, maybe even second pair offensive defenseman. I just don't think he fits overly well in the Ottawa Senators organization, so if the Senators were able to get something they would really like maybe a little bit more of a forward upgrade or something like that, maybe someone who could replace a guy like Tarasenko or Kubalik in the lineup who's a little bit younger, maybe they would look to move Brannstrom. I could see him definitely be a possible trade candidate for the team, so I'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but apparently Brannstrom on the defensive end and Kastelic on the offensive end are going to be some interesting names to watch out for the next little while, and we're going to have to keep our eye on them. Now, going over to the Nashville Predators, St. Louis Blues, and Arizona Coyotes. Now, if you look at the Western Conference landscape right now, we talked about the standings earlier in the video. 5 teams in the Western Conference have already broke 70 points, with Edmonton only 2 points back of 70. LA, who's been on a surge after the All-Star break, is only 4 points back of 70. So those teams all look like they're probably going to make the playoffs. LA, Edmonton, Vegas, Vancouver from the Pacific, and Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg from the Central. So those teams all look like they're probably going to make the playoffs. But the interesting thing is, there are 5 teams in the Western Conference who are fighting for 1 playoff spot, and there are very likely a chance that most of those teams wind up being sellers. Now, if you look at the teams who are probably guaranteed sellers right now, you have the Ducks, the Sharks, and the Hawks, who have been mentioned to be sellers the entirety of the season. You have the Arizona Coyotes, who have fallen out extremely hard and are way out of a playoff spot right now. We'll get to them in a couple of minutes. But if you look at the other 5 teams who are currently still within 3 points of a playoff spot, you have the Calgary Flames, who have already moved Zadorov and Lindholm and are most likely going to move Hanifin and Tanev before a deadline, if not possibly Markstrom as well. You have the Kraken, who do have a couple of decent pending UFAs, and Eberle and Wemberg, who they could move if they were to be sellers. The Minnesota Wild are probably the team who I think is most likely to not do anything. They don't have very many pending UFAs except for depth guys like Maroon, Goligoski, Merrill, Fleury, and I think they probably won't move anyone if they're still in the playoff race. So I'll be interested to see what Minnesota does. But Nashville, they have a ton of pending UFAs, including guys like Novak, Trennan, Carey on the defensive end. Barry's been wanting to have a fresh start. There's a lot of talk that Saros is a very likely guy to get moved. And then you also have the St. Louis Blues, who have lost a couple of games in a row, and we know that Doug Armstrong is not afraid to sell off pieces off that team, especially if he doesn't feel that this team is going to be really good, even if they are in a playoff spot. So you got 5 teams there who are fighting for 1 playoff spot, and 4 of them have very likely candidates to be sellers at the trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But going over to Nashville, Elliot Friedman did his recent 32 Thoughts blog post over the past couple of days, and he was mentioned as Nashville Predators. He mentioned 2 things. First, it's seeming even more increasingly likely as the days go on that Saros will be moved by the Nashville Predators. He said at the beginning of the season he would say it's a 99% chance that Saros winds up staying. He's going as low as saying like it's a 25-75% chance and 75% chance he still stays, but now it's gone down to 25% that he could definitely be traded, and he's even talked to some people who think that's possibly a 50-50 chance right now that Saros stays or gets moved, or he stays in Nashville. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for. On a recent radio hit on the NHL Network, Elliot Friedman did say that he thinks that a big part of the reason why they would be willing to move Saros right now is because they have a Skarov in the minors who's been doing absolutely phenomenal at the AHL level. So it looks like he's going to be the future starter for the Nashville Predators, with him being in the minors and with him possibly being an NHL goalie as early as next year. That does make Saros expendable, so I do think they'll definitely try and move him, especially if it's able to get them a solid offensive weapon there on the team. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but it sounds like Saros is more and more likely to be dealt. He also mentions a guy like Thomas Novak who's a possible trade candidate. I've said this for a while now. I think Novak is going to be a fantastic potential trade candidate. Preds are on the outside looking in right now, barely for a playoff spot. I think there's a very likely chance to move off some of their UFAs. They would love to keep Novak, but with his production, the way he's been playing over the past couple of years, there's a very likely chance that the Predators probably don't want to pay him the money he wants to. He's making $800,000 for this rest of this year. After being called up last year, had 43 points in 51 games. So far this year, he's been actually pretty good. He suffered some injuries, but he's actually been a really good player this year. But he's making $800,000 and is a really good 3C. I think there will be a ton of cap strap teams out there who would really like a guy who's only making under $1 million and can produce at the level Novak's producing. So I think Novak's a very likely trade candidate for the Predators. And I think if they were to be sellers and they do move off a couple of penny UFAs, I think Novak is a very likely trade candidate for him. So I'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But according to Elliot Friedman on his recent 32 Thoughts blog, Saros is getting more increasingly likely to be traded by the minute, while Novak, it does seem like there will be some teams interested, and although the Preds do want to re-sign him, I think there's a very likely possibility they move him. So I'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to the St. Louis Blues, talking about teams who are in that Western Conference playoff race who could definitely look to sell. That's another team with the St. Louis Blues who could definitely look to do that. They're currently in the playoff spot, but they're tied with the Preds. They're 2 points up in the Wild, 3 up on the Kraken and the Flames. So there's no guarantee that the Blues do make the playoffs. And with that being said, we know that Doug Armstrong really does wind up moving players that he thinks that won't help him win the cup. So there's definitely a couple of pieces I could see be moved, including guys like Parayko, Krug. I know Peronovich's name has come up a little bit over the past little while. UFAs like Kapanen, Verana, Blais on the forward group I think could also be moved. Scandella on the defensive end. But one guy that Elliot Friedman does mention is a guy who could possibly be moved is Blues forward Pavel Buchnevich. He says that even though Doug Armstrong doesn't usually talk about this stuff, Buchnevich's value has probably never been higher, and it's probably worth, Elliot Friedman speculates, something around like 2 first-round picks. So it will be interesting to see if a guy like Buchnevich could definitely be moved. I've even seen him on a couple of trade bait boards, including TSN's trade bait board. I definitely think there's a very likely possibility Buchnevich could be a guy who ends up being on the move. Now I think Parayko's another guy who could definitely be moved. Like I said, some of the UFAs. I don't think the Blues, even though they're in the playoff spot right now, are completely ruled out from being sellers at this year's trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But according to Elliot Friedman, Buchnevich's price tag has never been higher for the St. Louis Blues, and there's a very likely chance that they could wind up moving him. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to the Florida Panthers, on the recent Insider Trading video on TSN, they were talking about the Florida Panthers, saying that they do really want to add. They haven't been mentioned a whole bunch in trade talks over the past while, but they do really want to add. Now, they don't have very much assets. Like I said in the last video when I was talking about Hannafin, they don't have too much assets. No first-round picks, I think, until 2026. This year's is in Philly. Next year's is in Calgary, so they don't really have too much in the way of assets to work with to try and add to this team. But they do seem to be wanting to add like a third line forward. It seems like Elliot Friedman does think that he was putting out on his blog post that he speculates, what about Riley Smith going back to Florida? We'll get to Pittsburgh in a second, but Smith, who was a long-time Vegas Golden Knights member before that, was a really good Florida Panther player. If the Penguins are willing to retain some money, he could be a fantastic third line forward for the Florida Panthers. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out, but that's something the Panthers would like to add on the forward group. Would probably like to add a third line center. Maybe a guy like Riley Smith could be a fit. I've seen some other people say bring back a guy like Anthony Duclair, who could be a fit too. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with Florida, but it does sound like they really do want a third line winger to sort of work and round out that top nine. But according to Insider Trading, it does sound like it's really, really hard for them to make that work given their low assets that they have. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. Going over to the Arizona Coyotes, another Western Conference team who's probably going to be sellers entering the trade deadline. According to Chris Johnson on Insider Trading video, he says that Arizona is once again going to be sellers at this year's trade deadline. As much as there was a lot of playoff aspirations, they've had an 11-game losing streak. They look absolutely awful, and there's a very likely chance that after a really good start, it doesn't look like they'll make the playoffs. So it looks like they're going to be sellers again, moving guys like, my guess will be Zucker for sure. Dumba's probably going to get moved. Stetcher's probably getting moved. Chris Johnson does say that they're not opposed to grabbing more draft capital to help them in the future. So I think if they can move even like Dumba for a third-round pick, Zucker for a third-round pick, Stetcher for like a fourth or fifth-round pick, they'll be willing to do so. They have 20 picks apparently in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 years NHL draft. So they have a lot of draft capital. So moving some more pieces. Elliot Friedman does mention the Arizona Coyotes in his recent blog post too, saying that the Avalanche could target them for a center. He says that they do have familiarity with a guy like Alex Kerfoot. Nick Bjugstad's a really good center that some teams could covet. He also mentions a guy like Michael Carcioni, who's had a pretty good season this year, could wind up helping that Colorado Avalanche team too. So we'll have to wait and see on the Arizona Coyotes and Colorado Avalanche potentially making a deal surrounding a center like a Kerfoot or a Bjugstad, but it does sound like Colorado might be having some interest in a guy like Kerfoot or Bjugstad from Arizona, but it does sound like Arizona is probably going to be sellers, and I do wonder about how much of this losing streak is connected to the Arizona Coyotes' potential arena situation and what happens. Elliot Friedman does also mention in that blog post that while Alex Miller was supposed to meet with the staff around the Arizona Coyotes arena situation and sort of update them on what's going to happen, he hasn't met with them yet. So I think it's very likely that this team will end up getting relocated. I know there's been some really good talks about them getting an arena deal, but in my personal opinion, I do think that with the talk that they were supposed to be announced around Super Bowl weekend, and now we're a week and a half past that, I really do think there's a very likely chance that this team does wind up getting moved. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But for the time being, for the season, for the next 2.5 weeks, it does seem like Arizona will be sellers. So expect guys like Zucker to be moved, Dumba, potentially Kerfoot, potentially Bjugstad. They're not guarantees given the fact they have an extra year on their contract, but look for those guys to possibly get moved. Stetcher on the blue line. I wonder about a guy like Karol Vejmelka. So look for the Arizona Coyotes to be a team who ends up making some moves. And lastly, we're going over to Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, Kyle Dubas recently did a press conference. On top of that, there's been mention about this on Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts blog post, as well as the TSN Insider Trading video. And apparently, there's a very likely chance that the Penguins may start to blow up this roster. Now, Elliot Friedman does think that they've already consulted with Crosby about this. He does think that it would be stupid not to. And the way that Dubas rolled in Toronto, he does think that they've already talked to Crosby about this. But it does seem like they're going to try and go to the road of at least a small retool, if not rebuild. According to people on TSN Insider Trading, it does sound like anyone who's not a core player is untouchable. So my guess would be guys like Letang. Maybe Carlson would be included in that too. Malkin, Crosby, except for those four, probably anyone else will be available. My guess will also be Jari probably stays given his contract, but there's going to be a lot of interesting situations that happen over the next 2.5 weeks for Pittsburgh. They're 8 points out of the playoffs right now. They're not looking overly good, and there's a very likely chance that this team could go for a retool. And if they go for a retool, does Guentzel want to go back? And if Guentzel doesn't want to go back, is he a very likely trade candidate for the Penguins to move? On top of that, you got Riley Smith, who's a name who's been mentioned over the past little while. I've seen him be mentioned to Florida by Elliot Friedman. Vegas has been mentioned a couple of times too, could be interested in bringing back Riley Smith. So I'll have to see exactly what happens, but Smith is a name who I could see be moved. The rest of this year plus one more season at $5 million. Marcus Pettersson is a really good top four defenseman, making $4.025 million for the rest of this year plus one more season. He's another guy who I could see be moved. There's probably a couple of other guys out there. I do wonder if guys like Russ or Raquel could definitely garner some interest too. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens. But this team doesn't have too many huge pending UFAs besides Guentzel. And I do think with them being where they are in the standings right now, there's a very likely chance that this team could wind up blowing it up enough that they move a couple of pieces with terms. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens. But according to Kyle Dubas at his press conference, only the core players are untouchable in Pittsburgh, and there's a very likely chance that they could make some moves before the trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But it sounds like there's a very likely chance that this team could be going into a retool or rebuild. And Elliot Friedman does even think that even though they may go into a retool or rebuild, he does think that Crosby will probably still remain with Pittsburgh, even though he'll be a UFA not this upcoming offseason but next offseason. So he does think that even if they were to go to a retool, Crosby probably stays with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out. But it does sound like Pittsburgh's probably going through a small retool or rebuild, and it does sound like there's a very likely chance to make a couple of seller moves before the trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. What do you think about these moves? Could Pittsburgh really blow it up? Who could definitely get moved? Is Smith a possibility? Raquel, Rust, some of the UFAs like Carter, Guentzel, Pettersson be moved? Could Nedeljkovic be moved? Definitely love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you see the Arizona Coyotes making some moves? I definitely see them being sellers after this 11-game losing streak. I see Dumba being moved, Zucker, Stetcher, potentially Bukestad, potentially Kerfoot, potentially Vejmelka. I think there's a very likely amount of players who the Arizona Coyotes could move before a trade deadline, and I really do wonder what's next for the Arizona Coyotes' future in Arizona. On top of that, do the Panthers make an addition? Even though they have low assets, could they go out and acquire a guy maybe like a Riley Smith, maybe like Anthony Duclair? I think it's very likely for them given where they are in the standings right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Panthers added. Could the Blues move a guy like Buchnevich? It seems that the price on him is extremely high. I think there's a very likely possibility he could be moved, so we'll have to wait and see on the Blues. Could the Preds move Saros? The Preds are going to move Novak. I think it's very likely that both those guys do end up getting moved, so we'll have to wait and see on that. And on top of that, do you see Senators moving Brannstrom and Kastelic on top of their other UFAs? I think it's definitely a possibility, as Brannstrom's been talked about a lot, and Kastelic hasn't had a really good season. So love to hear your thoughts on that. Plus, what do you think about the waiver updates, signing updates, injury updates, and the standings as of February 22nd, 2024? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're like it, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. I'll never be able to do this without you guys. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all this discussed in today's video. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So if you check that out, leave a link down in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.